So I would talk about alternatives to multilateralism. And as Dirk said, this is a Corona event, but it's really a pleasure after 1 year in lockdown to at least be on a real stage again. So Corona has made us all more aware of how complex global supply chains have become. This image, which you see in the back, shows you that a single cup of coffee can depend on as many as 19 different countries. And by now, many of us wonder, what is actually happening in these 19 countries? We as consumers, as coffee drinkers, we know that our consumption is linked to social and environmental burden elsewhere. For example, deforestation. Deforestation is happening to clear land for growing coffee. Agricultural commodities are a major driver of global deforestation. There are also social issues, such as child labor. There's some reports that during the coffee harvesting season in Honduras, up to 40% of workers are children. Often domestic legislation does exist, but is not enforced. And international cooperation, multilateralism, has proven unsuccessful in coordinating states' common responses to such challenges in global supply chains. But did you know that there are forms of alternative governance, alternatives that allow us to reduce social and environmental burden shifting? I will talk about these alternatives tonight. They are private regulation, public supply chain laws, and forms of transnational hybrid governance. Private regulation is probably the most well-known alternative, especially in form of voluntary certification. I'm sure all of you have already seen such labels on your foodstuff before. Most people are aware of such labels, but hardly anyone knows what they actually mean. These labels signify that private initiatives guarantee producers' compliance with specific standards. For example, the organic labels signify that there was no use of toxic pesticides and fertilizers in the process of production. And in addition, for example, organic programs exclude GMOs, genetically modified organisms. The fair trade labels, which you see here, they guarantee that there was no use of child labor in the process of production. So as you're aware of such labels, I would like to ask you, what do you think, when was the first certification program created? What do you guess? Sorry? 1990s? 1950s? 1970s? You're not even close. Like in the 1990s, we saw the emergence of many international programs because markets globalized, and then a lot of local and national programs harmonized their standards. Do you want to have another guess? 40s? Yeah, it's getting closer. So the first standard was this one at the bottom left, the Demeter seal. The Demeter standard was created as early as 1928. Today, Demeter is the third most widespread label of organic foodstuff worldwide. Both early organic and fair trade movements formed in clear opposition to the conventional economic system. Organic movements wanted to resist the expansion of industrialized agriculture, and fair trade movements wanted to overcome the colonial or neo-colonial division of labor between producers in the global south and consumers in the global north. Advantages of this form of governance include that it's voluntary and it's transnational in scope, meaning that it's independent from nation-state borders. The Demeter standard is used in more than 50 countries, including production in both developing and developed countries. Disadvantages include that there are free rider problems because it's voluntary. So if a farmer decides to stop the use of toxic pesticides, It's that farmer that bears all the cost, although neighboring farms actually benefit from this too, and the whole community. Another problem is that most standards were defined in Europe and North America, and in consequence, very often the standards disadvantage producers in the Global South for various reasons, including disproportionately high auditing costs. Probably the most severe disadvantage, however, is that ambitious programs such as organic and fair trade only affect in niche segments of world markets. Yeah? Only 14% of global coffee area are certified as fair trade, and only 8% are organic certified. Yeah. So let me introduce the second alternative, public supply chain laws. These laws require information disclosure from importers. For example, the European Union and the United States demand due diligence from importers of so-called conflict minerals. The basic idea is here that no company will buy from armed groups in conflict regions if they have to make it public afterwards. Yeah? So we asked importers where their supply comes from. There are supply chain laws right now for conflict minerals and illegal logged timber in the European Union. And Germany just very recently agreed upon a more general supply chain law. As supply chain laws equally apply to all importers, there are no free rider problems. Yeah? This is a major difference to private regulation. In the case of private regulation, those companies that voluntarily commit to stricter standards have higher production costs and are potentially disadvantaged in the global economy. Now with supply chain laws, we try to change the rules of the game. Yeah? A supply chain law potentially prohibiting child labor would make it very risky for a coffee company to import from a country like Honduras, where child labor is common on coffee plantations. Yeah? Such countries, exporting countries, will be under pressure with supply chain laws to enforce often existing regulation, for instance, the prohibition of child labor. Again, we are changing the rules of the game. Yeah? The problem is that current supply chain laws are only based on transparency and legality. They do not prescribe concrete standards yet, such as organic food programs that prescribe or prohibit the use of toxic pesticides. Yeah? It's not forbidden to import, to buy and import minerals from armed groups in conflict regions. You just have to make public that you might potentially have been funding war activities. Yeah? In addition, for the governments of importing countries, monitoring and control is quite difficult outside of their own jurisdictions. So up to you to decide whether this is a solution. Finally, the third alternative is transnational hybrid governance. Hybrid means that states encourage private regulation. The EU Renewable Energy Directive provides an example here. The EU determines specific sustainability standards for biomass-based energy contributing to its renewable energy targets. As part of the European Green Deal, the EU strives for a 32% share of renewables by 2030. Currently, we're slightly below 20%, so this would be quite an increase. Yeah? And renewable energy is not only solar and wind energy, but also biomass-based energy. For example, palm oil-based biodiesel in the transport sector. And as most of us know by now, oil palms are very often grown on deforested land. Yeah? Agricultural commodities, as I said before, are a major driver of global tree cover loss. So last year in 2020, we lost more than 12 million hectares of forest, including 4.2 million hectares of humid tropical primary forest. Yeah, that's an area, just the primary forest we lost, that's an area the size of the Netherlands. Yeah? And what is potentially more crucial is that the resulting carbon emissions, which are contributing to climate change, were 3 times the emissions of Germany, the total emissions of Germany in the same period. Yeah? Therefore, the EU, including Germany, asks companies that are contributing to the renewable energy targets that they fulfill certain sustainability standards, including zero deforestation in their supply chain. The only way for companies to prove compliance to these standards, including zero deforestation in their supply chain, the only way to prove compliance is private certification. Yeah? Hence, private certification has become de facto mandatory for biomass-based energy in the EU. The problem with that is that monitoring and control is very much left to NGOs, yeah? Non-governmental organizations such as WWF, the Rainforest Alliance, and Amnesty International. There are many more. Yeah? And often they, on the one hand, they accomplish to give a voice to otherwise marginalized groups. On the other hand, we tend to overextend the capacities of NGOs for enforcement. And of course, it would be better if affected people had an opportunity to speak for themselves. Yeah? It would be better if all over the world we had democratically elected governments acting on behalf of the people and enforcing often existing legislation. It would be much better if we had multilateral agreements effectively addressing global issues such as tropical deforestation and climate change. However, this is not the case. Yeah? There's some hope now, probably with the new Biden government, and in Germany we will have elections too in September. So I'm hopeful, but for the moment we only have alternatives, and at least we do have these alternatives. So we need more research. I'm a researcher, I have to say this at the end of my talk, but we need more research to better understand and more prudently combine public with private regulation. In the meantime, however, there's no need or excuse for any individual consumer, corporation, or Western country to still purchase goods and services produced under unacceptable conditions. Alternatives are available. Transnational governance is possible. Thank you for your time.